You are listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. Coming to you virtually live from high atop the historic Raleigh building in beautiful downtown Raleigh. The NC F&B takes the listener behind the scenes to tell the stories of the people that contribute to the creation of the food and beverage community of North Carolina. And now, the misfits in the dish pit, the faces of the front. They are Max Trujillo and Matthew Weiss.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And today in studio, we have a very special guest who needs no introduction, but I will do it nonetheless because the accolades are numerous. We have a Peabody Award winner, multi-time nominee for the James Beard Award of Best Chef Southeast. You might know her as the host of A Chef's Life, but we here on the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast know you best for filling in for me as co-host of the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. So now you, of course, know who I'm talking about, the one, the only, Ms. Vivian Howard.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. I forgot about that.
You forgot about that? I thought that's what, your most proudest accomplishment.
Yes, I forgot about that too.
This is similar to how I kept thinking that Andrea Rusing hated me because I interviewed really horribly one time, and then when we actually interviewed her, she's like, "I interviewed you?" I'm like, well, yeah, you did. I guess I did not make an impact on your life.
She's hard to read too.
Yeah.
I'm always like, "Do you like me?" I can't tell. And I work really hard for people to like me.
Yeah. You're a likable person. I think that comes across on screen. Even Felicia, my wife, is always like, Vivian is exactly who she is. Like, I've never seen her. It's not like, because being that we're from Los Angeles, you see like TV people that are like so plastic and so fake in person, or just vice versa of who they really are on camera or so. And no, it's real. Your show that you've been doing with that, A Chef's Life, you did for 6 seasons?
6 seasons, yes.
Was really just kind of like, when we tried to describe it before, forgive us, we've already covered all this stuff in previous episodes, but it was like it was a show about your life, but it was also a show about food, and it was a documentary also about the state of North Carolina, and it was just pure and honest. It was exactly who it was. You had the Avett brothers open it with their music, and they're of the same state, and everything just felt homegrown,
authentic,
genuine. And so now you're doing a new show, Somewhere South, that will premiere March 15th.
March 27th.
March 27th.
At 9 p.m.
At 9 p.m. Thank you.
On your local PBS network.
On PBS, everywhere at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Very cool. And so let's just get right there. Why we had some conversation about it before, but how is this different, and what is this about?
Well, Somewhere South, kind of, the goal is to broaden the story of Southern food and the definition of what we consider Southern food. I mean, I think for so long we've had such a narrow definition for that, and it's really not accurate. It never really has been accurate. And our show, A Chef's Life, really, I think, painted a very precise picture of that narrow definition. I wanted to evolve the narrative and evolve the story and have what I was doing on television reflect where I was, where my interests were, and where I felt like we should be pushing the story and the stories we should be telling at this point.
So is it fair to say, because A Chef's Life was the ingredient was the driver of each episode, right? So you were out there to find ingredients. But it seems like for this show, and we've had the privilege of watching 2 episodes so far, it's more about the people and the place outside of Kinston, North Carolina. Yeah,
well, okay, so every episode of A Chef's Life, as you said, was about an ingredient.
Right.
And we told the story of that ingredient through, my personal relationship with it. We did something historic with it, and we did something new with it. Mm-hmm. And every episode of Somewhere South is about a dish that every culture shares.
Yeah.
So I wanted, a few years ago, I was trying to come up with what my next book would be. And I was talking to my editor, and I was like, well, there's only like 20 dishes in the whole world. Every culture's got, a dumpling, a way of cooking greens, a form of barbecue, a celebration food, and I was like, so can I write that book? And, within every chapter, there'll be, recipes and stories that demonstrate, communities and cultures' versions of it. But ultimately, we decided that I probably wasn't the person to write that particular book, but I still had this like deep interest in that subject. And so through this show, I'm able to be not an authority on every way we cook these dishes, but really a student.
Yeah.
So we go outside of Eastern North Carolina, but also inside Eastern North Carolina, all over the South, and I learn about the way different communities treat that dish.
Yeah. So like the episodes we watched, the first one is all about hand pies and everything from an empanada to the Apple Jacks that you grew up eating and
to pepperoni rolls.
Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, and I'm curious myself, and Max and I always talk about, especially with our show, should we rebrand? Are we holding ourselves back by something? We're called the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast, so is that limiting us? And so, the question comes up, well, couldn't you have just expanded a chef's life because it was already a successful show rather than almost starting over and rebranding? Just to play devil's advocate for a second.
I think yes and no. I mean, the premise of A Chef's Life was so rooted in my personal life. And, I experienced every personal and professional triumph and tragedy on camera for the last 8 years. And I really felt as if I had earned the opportunity to evolve what I was doing to make it something that suited my interests. And so, yes, you could rebrand it, but it would no longer be A Chef's Life. Mm-hmm. And, this was a big opportunity for us because, A Chef's Life and most shows on PBS, every programmer across the country decides whether or not they want to air it.
Yeah.
And so that makes it really hard for us to promote or to get momentum behind it on a national level. And this show, and it was contingent on rebranding it, will air the same time on PBS nationwide.
Right.
And
so
in prime time,
it fills the slot where A Chef's Life was.
Well, no, it might take the time slot, but no, what Vivian's telling us is that this is like a national show on PBS as opposed to just selected markets.
Right.
So you have a much larger voice and platform, which you even make reference to in episode 2 about porridge, where you're speaking with African-American chefs and writers and all, and you're like, I have a platform that, like not everyone gets a chance to speak about the things they want to talk about. I'm fortunate enough to have this platform, and I'm giving you all a chance to say what you mean and kind of bring it out bigger. Because from what I understand, of course, The Chef's Life was about your life. You were a chef, and a lot of it was based on The Chef and the Farmer, your restaurant in Kinston. And so for those that have never seen the show or aren't familiar with what you've done before, this is more like you don't need to know who Vivian Howard was before, because this is all topic-based and cultural-based, but you yourself, Vivian, have established yourself as a personality so much more through your body of work that it's like, okay, next chapter, now we're just talking about content as opposed to my perspective of the content. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, I think for me, it's like over, the 6 years of being on TV with The Chef's Life, I have really earned the trust of a lot of people, like more than 4 million viewers per episode.
Yeah.
And, earning that trust and then having it, I feel a responsibility to use that platform to push people to hopefully like soften the edges around the way we feel about our neighbors. I'm not on TV like for fun.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have fun being on TV, but it's never been like the act of it is not like, I don't leave it and I'm like, yeah. So I feel a responsibility and a purpose. My biggest fear is to squander the influence and the trust that I have.
Yeah.
You know, we have a responsibility too, and that's to the great people that help support our show. People like the folks at the Folk Foundation who are based out there in New Bern. They're a 501c3 nonprofit that works on the Folks Journal. They are a company that champions all good things crafted in North Carolina and the folks that make them. So whether you're a painter, an artist, a podcaster, a chef, a distiller, a brewer, these are stories that the folks at the Folks Foundation want to know about. And basically they're kind of doing what we do, but in a printed form and in a written form. And that's why there's this great synergy, the way the tech people like to say, between the both of us. And so for those interested, go to folksfoundation.org, learn more about them. You can sign up. You can get their quarterly magazine, both in online form or in printed form. But then you can also be attached to many of the things that they do and support. And so the great folks at Folks Foundation can help you. Go to folksfoundation.org.
Yeah, and I'm excited because they're opening up that general store and a bar type speakeasy thing over in New Bern, which is going to be pretty awesome.
That's
it's
cool.
like the physical. But take us back to that conversation you were having about PBS for a moment, because it seems to me like you were creatively felt that the Chef's Life you had taken it.
It had run its course.
It had run its course,
and I wanted to be like Seinfeld, like going out like at the top of our game, rather than I wanted.
But then you would go become a recluse for a couple of years.
Well,
did.
That's in the cards at some point.
At some point.
So now she's in cars with chefs having caffeine.
This is their next iteration.
Yeah. But in a way, so the great part is like even just this small sample that we saw on the new show on Somewhere South, you're speaking with people that we all know and love that have been on the show here and are friends just because we know that this North Carolina food community is so tight. But you had Oscar Diaz of the Cortez. You've had Ricky Moore, who is awesome, and he's starting to finally get his due. He just got a James Beard semifinalist nod, and but you go outside of the state as well, as you mentioned, because you were talking to Mashama Bailey out there at the Gray, which is in Savannah, and she's getting her due now too. It's great. Like so many people are starting to understand so much more about the personalities of the people that create great food and great food concepts in the South, and it's much bigger. We've talked about like the South just kind of almost had a derogatory name for so many years, like, oh, it's just Southern food. Oh, it's just Southern food. It's like, no, there's actually a whole lot here, and all the food we eat kind of has roots based on what we've done here, and that's really what I'm getting that you're exposing and showing in the TV show. I applaud you for doing it because you're kind of, you're doing like the video version of what we're doing, just to give ourselves credit in the same token.
You probably took all of your inspiration from the podcast.
I think
is what
I
Max
did.
saying. Yeah.
It's coming back to me now.
Yeah, now you're really. So what really happened is I was listening to NC F&amp. No, but and I'm wondering, did PBS come to you and say, "Hey, Vivian, can you do this?" Did you go to them, or did you and Cynthia? How was the genesis of Somewhere South?
What happened about maybe almost 3 years now was I said, I'm not doing a Chef's Life anymore.
You put your foot down. There's a big stomping moment.
I kind of acted like a child, and I regret some of that. But I just I hit a wall, and I'm like, So I said, I want to do this. I want to do a show about the dishes that every culture shares. And, I'm an idea person, and like whenever anyone in my life, I come to them and I say, I have an idea, they all like crouch under the table. So because I have ideas, but I don't always know how to execute them. And that was very much the case here. But so
you and Max share that. By the way.
I got a meeting with the big people at PBS in DC, and Cynthia, the director, and I went up there, and around a conference table, I pitched this idea. And I was breathless and red-faced and excited and hitting the table and standing up and just really enthusiastic and passionate. And long story short, they said, okay,
right,
we'll do this. And I said, but we need to be in prime time, and we want to air across the country at the same time because we've earned that.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit more of a conversation, but it ended up happening. So
explain that, because I think people in the South might not know. So when you did a Chef's Life, it was only in it wasn't a national show. So like if you were in the West Coast, you wouldn't have necessarily gotten that on your local PBS.
Well, so what happens is like PBS every market controls their programming.
Yeah.
So UNCTV has a programmer, and that programmer decides what PBS shows, because there's like 200 PBS cooking shows even.
Okay.
What shows that are offered through the PBS network, what they're going to air, and when, and if. And so it was really up to the individual programmers. Now, A Chef's Life aired in 98% of all the markets.
Okay.
But, all over the place.
Like not all at the same time.
Right. Like season 1 would start in Minnesota like 2 years after it started here.
Okay.
And so it's hard to monitor and like build on that.
Right.
And so there's a few things like Antiques Roadshow or like Downton Abbey or those things that air on main PBS, and the programmers have to take it.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that they have to take what we're doing, but
But they're gonna take it.
Well,
it sounds like
It's not sounds like in the ABC here in North Carolina. So it's a control state. There are 100 counties, and if you're a new distiller,
by ABC you mean the alcohol beverage control, not the network.
not the
ABC.
network, yeah, alcohol beverage control. Because if you create like a new spirit and you want to sell it in this state, you can get approved by the state, but then it's your job to go to all 100 counties individually and sell it to that particular market. So, rather than just getting like a national or a statewide mandated, yes, this is now approved, you're going to carry this on all your shelves. So in a way, it's kind of like that, and it's a total bitch for sales, and like you're trying to get it all at one time.
Let me just put it this way. So all shows on PBS, for the most part, you have to raise the money as a producer yourself to make the show.
Right.
Sure.
So, PBS is not funding the show.
No. So
it's public broadcasting.
like PBS, there are way more eyeballs on A Chef's Life over the course of it airing than, let's say, Top Chef.
Mm-hmm.
But Top Chef makes a much bigger splash and impact every season that it comes out because it's all happening at once. There's a marketing machine behind it, and so
The perception.
the perception is different. So when you go out as someone making a PBS show to raise money to make that show, it's very hard to have funders or sponsors understand how many eyeballs are on the show because there's really no way to quantify it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all happening randomly.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's the back end of. But to tell you why, after all that, I'm on PBS, it's because PBS's mission is to make content that improves people's lives, much like you guys here at F&B
that's
so
Podcast.
sweet.
That's all we wanted from you, Vivian. Show's over. Thank you. Good night. No. Well, okay, but it is a good time to kind of switch a little bit here because, Vivian, you're not just doing TV. You are doing so much more. Of course, you have The Chef and the Farmer, and you have Boiler Room in Kinston, but you've got your sights on bigger things, and even going outside. The show goes outside of the state. You yourself are going to open up restaurants outside of the state and in Charleston. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Oh, and also I'd be
Benny's
remiss if I
big time.
didn't mention Benny's, where we actually have done a podcast from Benny's out in Wilmington, which is fantastic and amazing. But let's talk about the two new concepts that you have out there. Lenore is one, right?
Yes, Lenore, which is named for the county that I come from, and also Handy and Hot. So both restaurants will be downtown Charleston in a hotel, and I'm like just super excited and nervous because it's a big opportunity for me.
Sure.
Yeah, because Benny's Big Time was your husband Ben's kind of like joint, right? Wasn't that like he's taking like the lead on it, or in a sense? Like I remember him saying, like,
Well, it is called Benny's.
This is my place.
Yeah, well, he's a pizza, lover, aficionado, connoisseur.
Yeah. But it's been a while since you've opened your own place, and now in a completely different market where you don't have your hometown friends to be there. But obviously, it makes tons of sense to open in Charleston, where it's essentially, the food capital of America. Like I'd go that far to say that. It's pretty amazing out there.
It is, and for me, it is such a big opportunity because, Ben and I opened Chef and the Farmer like 14 years ago now.
That's crazy.
And, I was 27. We had very few resources, and it was very much like scrappy, and, everything we did was just kind of like, should we do this? I don't know. It wasn't really rooted in actual experience.
Yeah.
And so, I know so much more now. I know I'm much more comfortable in my skin. I know what I want to do. It may not be what other people want, but I know what I want to do. And this is really the first time that I'm able to articulate that. And, with all that, with all the strength that comes from experience.
So that's fascinating because if you said you're a person of all these ideas, and sometimes it's hard to articulate, or some people like hide under. So a couple of things that come to mind. Do you have what's called, they call it nowadays fashionable, a challenge network? So
what's that?
What is that?
Yeah, challenge network.
I guess I don't.
Well, it's people who basically tell you that your ideas are either good or not. Like you come to them with your ideas and they're like, okay, well, I hear your idea, but what about this, or how was that going to work? Like, are there people that do that for you, or?
Yeah, well, I live across the road from my parents.
There you go.
So
The original challenge
I
network.
have a built-in daily challenge network. It's interesting you bring that up because I never want to become a yes man or a yes woman, and I'm really mindful of that. And so I think I gravitate toward people that challenge me, and whose challenges I trust, and who I think really have. When they're challenging me, it's because they have my best interest at heart. And so I have my editor at Little Brown is, he challenges me so much that if he lived in North Carolina, I probably would have broken his neck.
That's like kind of the job of an editor, right? Like they have to. That's like literally their job.
Yeah, and my parents, I work really closely with this Baxter Miller and Ryan Stansel, and they
they're great.
And they are constantly like,
They're not quiet.
no, and they're like, that's not So I think it's important to surround yourself with a challenge network. Thank you for introducing me to that.
Now you just know the name of it. Yeah. So and so like I'm wondering myself, and we have a lot of ideas. So it's like when how do you, first of all, like you had this idea for Somewhere South and you made it happen. You had this idea for the Charleston restaurants, like, and you're already busy. You're a mom of two. You've got 3 restaurants. You've got a show. Like, how do you make all that work? I know it seems like a rote question, like, oh, how do you have all this time? But literally, how do you do all that?
I don't know. It's not pretty behind the scenes.
Well, you look good today in your
Thanks.
denim. What do you call your kids? Call it your uniform?
Yeah, I keep my wardrobe simple. Is one way. I know what I'm going to put on every morning.
There you go. That is a pro tip.
I'm like Jay Leno of you to be the denim on denim right now. Yes, it's great.
But seriously, think about how much time we think about maybe you don't, but like you spend like thinking about, what am I going to wear today, or how am I going to look? It's like, well, imagine you just like, I know I look good in this. So it's like, I guess the former CEO, maybe rest in peace, of Apple,
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs.
always wore that typical uniform. Yeah, so,
it's one decision you don't have
to
make.
So you have time for other stuff.
So I just have a bleached denim coverall.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very Ed Mitchell of you. I love that. No, but that's the beauty of you as the personality and who you are that comes through in the show and all that. Is you're a real person. You're a mom. You're running all these restaurants. I got to think, like, now that you are going to open these restaurants, are you getting in on the line in the beginning? You're going to have to do certain things. I just know, like, from experience, I worked with Wolfgang Puck for so long, for like 5 years, and he of all chefs I've ever seen from the outside in, he works on the line more than any chef I know of like that caliber, of that level. And he even realized too, he's like, I'm not a CEO, I'm a chef, so like I have to be on the line. And he had to cook all the time just because that was his strength. So are you gonna force yourself to be on the line at Lenore like at times? How's that gonna work?
I mean, what I think is what I've learned talking about that experience is that my projects have a stronger voice when I'm at the helm of them and really engaged and on the line, if you will. I am 42 years old this weekend, and
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
My wife's birthday is this weekend as well.
Really?
Yeah.
You caught up to me.
And I want to train my staff, and I want to give them the tools to do things the way that I would do them. And so I think that you can find me on the line, but hopefully not for long periods of time.
It's not sustainable.
I mean, like hell.
Well, it's interesting. So you mentioned in the porridge episode, which I guess maybe is like episode number 2. I don't know if they're going in a certain succession or so, but you mentioned how you feel socially awkward, especially around other food industry people, kind of out of place, don't know what to say. That's interesting for me to think about that with you, because you are a gregarious, outgoing, and seemingly fun-loving person. But what do you mean by that? How does that make you feel being around like Ashley Christensen, let's say, or Mashama in general? Like you said, you felt comfortable around her because she was just easy to chat with. But where does that come from?
I don't know. I mean, I think that my experience as a chef here in North Carolina was really isolated for a long time. And so I didn't go out for drinks with other chefs and talk shop. And, I remember I went to SFA symposium one year. I was doing like a little bite. It was the first time I'd ever gone, and I was doing a snack for something. And I'm in the prep kitchen, and Mike Lotta comes in. And I'm like, oh, Mike Lotta. Oh, I'm so nervous because, Mike Lotta.
Yeah.
And I see that he like has this knife roll that's like leather and it's worn, but it's beautiful. And he unrolls it and he's got all these knives and all these tools. And I'm like, I have a knife that I brought from North Carolina that I'd wrapped up in a towel and basically put in my back pocket. And so I've always, in my experience, like working at WD-50, I just couldn't. I felt different. I made a little mess on the floor every time I worked.
Yeah.
I got in trouble for wearing my Comey hat on the back of my head. They called me the flight attendant because they said I looked like a flight attendant. I did.
That imposter...
it's an imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome
I guess.
is real. It happens all the time. I mean, Matt feels it every day. People are like, Matt, you know shit about wine. But yet he's still selling it to everybody. But no, I mean, that's a common fear of many people, but you get to experience it on such a huge level because you got a lot of eyes on you. You had 4 million people watching you. You might have 40 million people watching you soon. So, you probably wake up and go like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Well, I have for a long time, and I did, but I have pushed out of that because I realized I have something.
Yeah. You keep getting to do this, so something must be working.
I may be feeling like I'm faking it somewhere, but there's something going on, and I don't want to have my insecurities paralyze me from pushing forward.
That confidence is great. That feels good when you know someone. Like it's always like the model thing. It's like, how did you know when you were going to model? It's like, well, I looked at myself in the mirror and I'm fucking hot. So. But like if a model
are you talking about a conversation you had with yourself?
Yeah. Once I realized how handsome I was, I decided to podcast.
Everybody must.
I decided to podcast.
Yeah, but it's like I actually don't mind when you hear a model, male, female, it doesn't matter. But when they actually admit that they're good looking, it's like because that's what you do. You are supposed to be. You're professionally good looking. So it's okay to say I'm attractive or so. So in the same scenario, it's like. Yeah, I know how to cook. I know how to speak well. I know how to connect people. I know how to be real. And the realness on the camera, I think, is the real star of what you do. And that's why I think with your restaurant, now that you're going to cook what you're going to do at Lenore, there's no way it's not going to work well because, like, whether it's art, whether it's music, if you're doing what you want to do, then it's going to make sense. You're not like, I'm going to give Charleston what they want. It's like, no, I'm going to do what I want, and people are going to see what I like, and that should translate to success.
Yeah, and I think I think maybe it comes with age, but I've figured out what I am really good at, or maybe better at within the thing that I do than other people, and I'm really harnessing that. So I think that storytelling is my greatest strength. It's my superpower.
Yeah.
So I've tried to inflect, my cookbooks with a large degree of storytelling to make them distinct from other cookbooks. I have tried to inflect my menus with storytelling and our special events with storytelling and clearly the show with storytelling. And even, I do this thing called Just the Tips Tuesday. And I try to have an element of my personal story in there to make the food, information that I'm sharing more accessible and more valuable for people.
I took notes one time when you were talking about beans, and you would you didn't soak the beans.
No.
You're like, you don't need to soak beans every time. But I kept clicking back in the story. I'm like, wait a minute, what's she doing? And then I went back and forth, and I just rewatched your story. That was probably all of 12 minutes or so, but I watched it 3 or 4 times to just kind of understand the technique of what you're doing. And I'm like, yeah. Then I went and did it, and I totally messed it up, but I learned from it, and then I did it again, and I kind of made pretty decent beans after that. But it's great because I like that you're doing that. You guys, everyone should watch that.
Just the tips. I hate talking about being not awards or anything, but I'm so proud of this because Just the Tips is just so far out of the realm of it was it's a finalist for an IACP award.
Oh wow!
The online digital video series, which is not even
that's
it doesn't
crazy.
even fit into that category, but I just entered it anyway because I felt like what we were doing was really distinct and different, and I wanted IACP to just see it. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that.
That's awesome.
I do want to share one tip also, especially since you're a restaurateur of soon to be 5 restaurants, that most restaurateurs should be doing, and that's their online platform. And ehungry.com is a great sponsor of our show because they give you and create the platform for you. So say you wanted to do takeout or some sort of order in business and increase your revenue, they will do that for your business. And all they take is 1.9% of the sales that they earn. And they don't even take it for the first 30 days. And if you use the NCFB promo code or you tell them that you heard about them on the NC F&B podcast, you'll get 60 days for free. So go to ehungry.com and increase your revenue if you're a restaurateur.
Well said, Matt.
Thank you.
Oh, that's good.
You paid attention in that meeting.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I had coffee that
I
day.
was looking him in the eye the whole time. I had a close audience.
Do you really? That's true. That was very helpful. That's probably why you're a great listener on the show. And one of the things that you said in the show, getting back to Somewhere South, is there was this change in the impression or the thought of Southern cooking where at some point it became cool to think about Southern cooking or cooking in the South. Do you remember when that shift happened or when you first realized this is now a cool thing?
I think probably about a decade ago. And I would credit the Southern Foodways Alliance so much with raising the perception and the story of Southern food, and they really made it cool. And I remember moving to the South and opening Chef and the Farmer and going to maybe it was an SFA event, and I had a jar of Hellman's or something, and Sean Brock had on a Duke's mayonnaise t-shirt, and I ran and threw my Hellman's in the trash. I'm like, oh my god.
We just talked about this last night on our recurring happy hour series that we were doing because we're doing this here at the kitchen. But someone, Liz Grandchamp from the shop, she uses Hellman's, and she's like, I'm from New England. This is what we use. But I informed her that on the West Coast, it's called Best Foods. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I am.
And isn't it just bizarre that it's the same thing? It's like Hardee's and Carl's Jr. It's the same thing, but it's just different packaging and different labels.
Right, but Duke's is different.
Oh, Duke's is different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I must say that I haven't touched a jar of Hellman's since. But
Since Duke's started sponsoring Chef's Life.
No.
But that was also a big episode on the Chef's Life, right?
Yes, we did a mayonnaise episode
Yeah.
with a blind tasting, and Ben licked it off a spoon like it was ice cream.
Right.
Well, you said ice cream, so are we just rolling through all of our sponsors all at one time?
Might as well get them out of the way.
Well, because you are also moving into South Carolina, coming out of Columbia, South Carolina, we have Proof Alcohol Ice Cream, where they let you think differently about ice cream. They had 7% ABV alcohol into every pint of ice cream, and they have flavors like coconut rum, mocha chocolate moonshine. They're doing a strawberry. They're doing the bourbon caramel. I mean, it's delicious stuff. We have a freezer fully loaded with all the ice cream, so you can take one on your way out, and just don't let it melt in the car. You got to eat it fast somewhere
For breakfast.
for breakfast. But yeah, go to Proof Alcohol Ice Cream. You can also pick up Proof Alcohol Ice Cream at Triangle Wine Company, a great friend and sponsor of the show as well. So go to trianglewineco.com and buy some ice cream while you're there.
What are some of the moments of the show that you can't help but watch over and over again yourself, that you're like, wow, that was like, maybe for a second you step out of yourself and as if you're a viewer and just watching these people and are absorbing it?
Watching the show, all the shows is really hard for me.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, I have watched, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but I have watched the opening of the new show like 20 times.
Okay.
Because, the opening of A Chef's Life was so good with the Avett Brothers song and the sweeping look at Eastern North Carolina. And
you succinctly sum up the entire show in your opening soliloquy. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and so like the opening for this new show was such a huge anxiety for us because it's like, how do you top that? How do you, what do we do? And we honestly, it was one of those decisions that just we kept kicking the can down the street because we didn't have a solution. And then kind of at the last minute, one of the producers, Shirlette Amons, found this Rhiannon Giddens song.
Yeah, Rhiannon Giddens, local to, I think, Chapel
Hill,
right?
She was in the Carolina Chocolate Drops, but now she's doing her solo thing. And the song and the portion of the song that we use just like has such great energy. And
I'm Vivian, and I'm a chef. The food I cook tells the story of Southern food as I know it. But that story is more complex than I thought.
I don't know where I'm going, but I'm on my way. Lord, if you love me, keep me, I pray.
So I set out to find the dishes that bind and define us. Along the way, I saw that when we eat together, we share more than a meal. The American South is my classroom, and the dishes we share will be my roadmap.
Our editor, Thomas Vickers, who's really the hero of this show and also A Chef's Life, I would say. You never see him because he's always in like a dungeon editing. But he did such an amazing job, like putting the images with the music. And so I've watched it like probably 20 times and just smiled through it. And I never smile when I'm watching myself. But it's just the way that it's kind of like a music video, when it all kind of works together.
Yeah. That's cool.
I will say selfishly, and I fully expect it to end up on the cutting room floor of the edit bay, but I was on. You probably don't even know this, but Miss Andrea Weigel, our friend, connected me while you were producing certain segments. Typically on the show on Somewhere South, you'll have a segment. And, it's topical about porridge or it's topical about the ham pies. And then there'll be a transition phase that goes to another segment. But in that transition, you get little clips of local people. And so you're having like other chefs or food writers or dumb podcasters that could say something about something on that topic. And you do them really quick. And so I showed up at Brewery Bavana to talk about dumplings. And then I think I talked about barbecue.
Yeah.
And pickled dishes as well. And all my answers were totally stupid. But if anything, the only reason why you'll use it is because I'll be the moron. And you're like, this is funny because he has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, we got to have a few of those in all the segments.
Yeah. So I will feel as uncomfortable watching myself as perhaps you might when you're watching your whole show. But
those little segments are so much fun because, Somewhere South is not always lighthearted.
No. Oh, no, not at all.
We have a lot of really uncomfortable, difficult conversations. I'm often in people's homes where, they don't speak English and we're trying to communicate through the language of food. And so, it can be heavy. And so we realized that we needed to kind of break apart those heavy moments with levity. And so,
Max will definitely make it.
Yes. So if it's the dumpling episode, we interviewed a bunch of people like man on the street or man at Brewery Bavana, like, what's your dumpling? Like the dumpling you grew up eating, and just kind of let people answer spontaneously. And we got some really great stuff.
Yeah, they asked me, Cynthia Hill asked me, she's like, so how do you define a dumpling? And I think I said, it's usually meat or vegetables wrapped in something. And she's like, okay, so with that, what's your favorite? I go, I don't know if it's really a dumpling, but I say taco. And she's like,
that's stretching.
I don't know. That's really. I go, what? It's a taco. Yeah, taco. And she's like,
taco dumpling.
Yeah. Next.
Yeah, one of the like pursuits for every episode has kind of a mission. I'm trying to figure something out. And for the dumpling episode, it's really like, what the hell is a dumpling?
Yeah.
Because, you described, a wrapper with something in it, folded. But then like chicken and dumplings is different.
Yeah,
matzo ball dumplings are different.
Yeah.
And so one is this very, precious thing, and then one is this very rustic thing. And so we were trying to understand worldwide, Southwide, like, what is the purpose of a dumpling? What is a dumpling? And I think we finally, we figured that out. But that's one of my favorite episodes, and one of my favorite moments in it is I'm cooking with Ed Lee.
Out in Knoxville, right?
Well, he's in Louisville, and
yes.
also D.C.
Yeah, he's
but
great.
We're cooking at Joe Kwan's house here in Raleigh, and it's a dinner that was called East Meets West, or East, whatever. It was a long time ago.
We tried crashing that one. Yeah. We got stopped at the door.
And we were talking about dumplings, and he's like, I'll tell you a secret, which it's on camera, so it's not a secret. He said, I pitched one time to an investor to open a restaurant called Take a Dumpling.
That is fantastic. I love
I'm probably going to get in trouble for sharing that, but it's on the show.
No one's listening.
Yeah, it's on there. And
not 42 minutes in, they're not listening. No.
And then another topic that was really, I don't know about controversial, but I know this is near and dear to Max's heart, and he likes to get on his soapbox about this one. But you were talking about soul food in the South, and you had 5 very accomplished African Americans: Mashama Bailey and Ricky Moore,
Tony Tipton,
BJ Dennis, Dr. Jessica Harris, Tony Tipton Morton.
Yeah, and I know you've won a Peabody Award, but you handled that really well. I like, Max, you mentioned it earlier, but you said, I do have a platform, and a lot of their frustrations, I think, were they weren't, or they didn't have a platform to really express what their thoughts of soul food was, and this kind of gave them that platform, essentially.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that was that was difficult,
I can imagine,
because there's this elephant in the room about, Black people and white people and Southern cooking and who owns it, and then why am I the person that's telling this story? And so I wanted to address all of that at the table so that we could have an honest conversation. I'm not sure that I did it.
Well, I think you even said that it still was almost uncomfortable, because Ricky Moore starts talking about specific food items. He's like chitlins and okra, and then, but then even more like the ear and like all that, and everyone's agreeing. It's like, yeah. But then there was a subtext that it's like, yeah, but it's a whole lot more than the food. It's not about that. It's about why we cook the food, who cooked the food, why we were forced to cook this food and not the other food. It was all the end meats that you didn't get because those went to the big house where all the white people were, and how even in God, a fascinating statistic that you're talking about And sadly, but what was it? 60% of all African Americans can trace their roots back to the port of Charleston, because that's where all the slave trade was coming from, and they were basically, slave traders were picking up everybody on the western side of Africa because they knew how to plant rice. And being a subterranean or a below sea level area, the Low Country of Charleston, it's built for rice production, and then all the beautiful homes are all owned by rice. The industry of rice, however it was. But it's like, yeah, but these were all slave owners or just rich white guys making money off the backs of African Americans that were slaves at that time. So,
but the interesting distinction, the thing that I really learned is that, I always associated the word slavery with labor. work, like physical labor. But
Right,
but what we learned is that those people were selected for their knowledge.
Right.
And it was on the backs of their knowledge and their skill, not just
That's a
labor,
story that does not get
they
told.
built the economy of Charleston.
Yeah.
And that just that's a nuance of history that's not highlighted. And learning that and being able to be part of sharing that is that's I'm so honored to do it.
But there was apprehension at that table to even, I think, all of those great speakers knowledgeable about their own culture and the food culture in general were also kind of apprehensive to say, like, do you really want us to tell you really how we feel about this? Like, is this the place? And I think you kind of alluded to it because you said, like, we had to change it up a little bit. Like, that was an intense meeting. So you just went straight to the gray and you talked with Mashama. You had to talk with her kind of one-on-one at her restaurant to kind of get like maybe a bit more intimate conversation built. Because if you are in a room with a lot of people that are talking about heavy content, it can be tough. Someone, maybe the way she feels about this is different than the way he feels. And you start taking these really big steps and stances on your perception of history and culture, and it may not share with everybody else. But the beautiful part about it is that was a platform that at least did something to move the conversation into having more conversations so that we can understand. Because, did we ever know that Western Africans were forcibly brought here to build and design these farm plantations? That's a storyline we never hear. So hopefully the next time that conversation comes up, we start there and then we keep going deeper into it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of tension at that table, and it was uncomfortable, and talking about watching things over and over. I can't watch that. I mean, I have many times, but it's painful. It's hard to watch, but I'm okay with that. I mean, I think we shouldn't assume that every conversation we have about our history or present or future is going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I think that's short-sighted, and I'm okay with being.
And I think you did exactly what you set out to do. You said you gave them a platform, and there was a platform, and maybe not everything got accomplished that they wanted to say, but something got said. And I mean, I'm more aware of that whole thing because before, to be completely honest with you, I wasn't woke, and I thought, what is the big deal? It's soul food. We consume it. We love it, and it's like any other food. What matters who's making it, as long as they're making it with regards to the traditions and they learned the correct way. But now we understand. Now I understand that there's all this history and racial, activity behind it. So I think that if I've taken away anything, I've taken away that. So
that's good.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And there was a couple other moments, and I know we're running short on time, but I think this got glossed over. But when you were with the Gullah chef,
BJ Murphy. BJ Dennis.
BJ Dennis, yeah.
BJ Dennis.
And you asked the woman whose house you went to
Miss Emily Meggett.
Miss Emily Meggett, who locally is known as, this unbelievable chef and home cook.
She's the
matriarch of the area.
Of Edisto Island.
Edisto.
She's kind of the expert on Geechee Gullah cooking.
Yeah. And what was fascinating is you asked both of them, so what does it mean to be Geechee Gullah, and how does that affect, you on your daily life? And Miss Meggett basically said, okay, I didn't even know that I was that, but now I'm being defined as that. But BJ said, it basically informs everything that he does.
Well, it's a generational thing, I mean, I think Miss Meggett grew up and has lived her life with that term Geechee Gullah being derogatory in some circles, and then in other circles not meaning much. But BJ Dennis, who's really trying to, exalt his heritage, is looking to people like Mrs. Meggett for insight and knowledge and mentorship, because he wants to. He's proud of his heritage and his culture, and I think that's
changed the narrative on what it means to be Geechee Gullah.
Yeah, it's almost like we learned this in a lot of episodes. First generation immigrants, they, let's say you're of Mexican heritage. You may not even speak Spanish, but then your children have a more intense interest in where they came from and their roots.
Sure.
And they're the ones that bring back the language and the food connection. And so I see that with BJ, because they're not new to this country, but it's like looking at his heritage through a different light. It's something to be proud of.
Yeah. And also understanding yourself and like, why do I speak differently than everybody else?
Right.
And why do I see the world from a different perspective? Oh, these are the reasons. So, yeah, that's fascinating.
So everyone's got to watch it. Lastly, who are we going to expect to see on the season as it goes on? I mean, I know some of the people that are on there, but give us just a little insight as to who we may familiarize ourselves with.
Triangle, North Carolina area people, we see, I mentioned Joe Kwan, we see Ashley Christensen, we see Mike Lee from Durham, we see Skinny.
Josh DeCarolis,
yes, from Mothers and Sons. We see Gray from Toro.
Oh, yeah.
I know the couple from Boricua Soul.
Yeah, Boricua Soul. We
yeah.
see them. They're lovely.
We're going to get them
guys.
on the show soon.
Yeah.
They cracked me up because we felt like how you feel, Vivian, when people recognize you, because they were like, what, his wife, and I can't remember.
Serena? I think it's Serena.
But she said, oh, he listens to your podcast all the time, and if I have to hear one more time, oh, the guys on the NC F&B said, one more time, I'm going to tell him to shut up. I'm like, wow, that's so meta, because I'm usually the person that's telling my wife about things Adam Carolla said on his podcast. And finally, I'm annoying another wife somewhere else.
You finally arrived.
Yes.
When you're annoying the wife of somebody else.
When I can annoy
You have
more
arrived.
than my own wife, I've done my job.
All right, last question for me, and then we'll get out of here on a lighter note. Does it feel like a relief now that the cameras aren't on you in your necessarily like personal life as much? I know there's still some of like your dad in it and things like that, but it's not, like you said, so much about your life in Kinston.
It does. It does. It's not that I had such an issue with my life being on TV. It was really that I feel like a chef's life had at a certain point, I was in a box that I was acting, and I really can't do that. So it's a relief, but this is a new challenge, and this is really, we stepped out of that box. So there's different challenges.
It's awesome. You get to do what you want to do. You had a inspiration of something that you wanted, and not only are you getting to do it, but we as consumers of it get to see this, and like I said, have very real educational experiences and evolution of our knowledge because of it.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I watch this show with so much pride of going like, yes, this is happening. These stories are getting out there. This is going to go national. This is all at one time. We can sit around and talk about it right before it is. It'd be like the Game of Thrones for food. Right?
I don't know about that.
Yes, you've always been the Daenerys, the mother of dragon fruit. There we go. And,
I've never seen Game of Thrones. I know that's hard to believe.
Wow.
no, she watches PBS. She doesn't have time
I
for
watch
HBO.
the back of my eyelids.
That's
That's what I watch.
Yeah.
No, Game of Thrones is like brain candy, but this is like soul food for your brain kind of thing.
Oh, don't use that word, man. You don't get to use that word.
I don't get to use that word even? Jeez.
If we learned anything about soul food, no. Thank you so much for coming in here. We didn't arrive when people started talking about us there. We arrived when you came to our studio here at the kitchen. When Vivian Howard comes to the kitchen studios to record on the NC F&B, then we've arrived.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Matt, what else you got?
Thank you, Vivian.
I've got one thing.
Oh, please.
We're having a premiere party.
Yes.
March 15th. At the Carolina Theater in
We're
Durham.
going. We wanna go.
Well, tickets
Yeah.
are for sale, so I think they're $15.
Yes.
And we're going to watch an episode y'all haven't seen. We're going to watch the dumpling
Oh,
episode.
nice.
And it'll be a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, everybody get your tickets. Get out there to the premiere.
Yeah. There'll be a link in our show notes to get tickets.
Yeah, we'll throw out a post and everything. Vivian, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you.
Thank you all.
Everyone, go to Chef and the Farmer, watch Somewhere South, go to your restaurants in Charleston when they open. You will eat, drink, and think very merrily.
Thanks for listening to the NC F&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes, and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.